'Cause I'm with you in the dark, with your heart as my mark, which shall shine you the way.
When someone is backed into a corner, they start to take risks. Risks that they deem necessary to escape a hopeless situation. Risks that they think they have to take to regain control of their lives. Risks born of desperation. In Chapter 5, Noelle takes a risk in pursuit of breaking off her set path, to stop watching her life pass by through the glass. But after taking the plunge with Chris, where did she find herself? I don't think Chris and Noelle up and drowned. Rather, I think they stumbled somewhere that they aren't supposed to be, at least not yet. I think that by plunging into the depths, they managed to skip ahead to the end of the game. Furthermore, there's something out there, waiting to be discovered at the bottom of the lake. A dark fountain deep beneath the waves. I think the fact that they skipped ahead, rather than died, is heavily implied by the fact that we still need to insert Chapter 7 to continue it all. There's so much more evidence that they are still alive than there is for not. You could make the argument that Noelle is suicidal and directly trying to end her own life. That isn't unfounded and actually has some pretty good evidence. Suicidal individuals often exhibit reckless, dangerous, or risk-taking behavior, express feelings of being trapped in a situation without a clear exit, have a sudden sense of calm after a period of mood changes, and give away meaningful possessions. This all lines up shockingly well with how Noelle acts in Chapter 5, especially how she's described in the scene where Susie confides in Chris that Noelle tried giving her more money than she's ever seen. While I definitely see the argument, I don't think Noelle would continue kicking or try to stay afloat as long as she did if she intended on sinking, nor would she need to pull Chris into the lake as well if she was intent on just ending her own life. Moreover, if you do choose to stop pressing proceed and thus stop kicking, the game violently course corrects, making it impossible to actually drown. Her being suicidal doesn't line up with her desire to do something crazy and cross the lake. I think that the lyrics of Raise Up Your Bat give us a better idea of what was actually happening here. Not only does the part of the song I'm looking at directly quote Noelle's theme, I think it perfectly mirrors the events of the route when thought of from her perspective. Come follow me into the dark. The links between water and darkness are like a fractal. There's always more the deeper you look. Shadow crystals that move like water in the hand, fountains of darkness called geysers, and shadows slipping off the mantle like water. Following somebody into the dark is near synonymous with following them into water. In this scene, Noelle is the one guiding Chris to follow her into the dark, deeper into the lake until they're both consumed. With your heart as the ark, which shall shine you the way. An ark, famously, is a boat like the one Noah and his family used to protect themselves against the great biblical flood. In other words, it's a vessel of protection against the waves. The song makes it sound like they're using the heart, the soul, to make it somewhere. And if there's a way the soul is shining, then there has to be a destination. The soul lights the path through the dark to this destination, a place I believe to be another dark world. Because I'm with you in the dark, with your heart as my mark. What does it mean to be someone's mark? In this context, I think it means the soul is the sole object of Noelle's attention. In the dialogue leading up to their swim, Noelle celebrates how much Chris has managed to change, and lauds how interesting they've become, going as far as to say that they found a way to stop being Chris, and that being around them is changing her too. The reason Chris ceased to be fully themselves is because they were overridden by the power of the soul, and now Noelle wants to use this same power to grow wings and fly and live for herself. Which shall guide you the way through the waves. This line just doubles down on the connections from earlier. If the soul is guiding a way through the water, then that way has to lead somewhere. These lyrics lay the groundwork of why I think they skipped ahead to a dark fountain under the lake, but when I was looking through the dialogue, there were several other things that piqued my interests. Going fully in depth on the Weird Route ARG is well outside the scope of this script, so if you don't know, I'll put something explaining it on screen. But when looking through all the responses to the question, one caught my eye.
The lake. Ding ding ding. This is it. You only need to see her once, and you'll move on.
Does the punctuation here strike anyone else as odd? Why make these two separate sentences? To me, this looks like Toby staring directly at us, like this, and begging for us to look at that second line. What other reason could Toby have had for separating these phrases, other than to put emphasis on us moving on? This is Toby spelling out the consequences of the lake walk. We are skipping ahead. Even if the emphasis on moving on somehow wasn't what he was going for, it's still a weird choice of words. Like, maybe you could say that he was referring to the recipients of the email moving on to the next question of the ARG, but that's a stretch considering there's no reason to think that there will be another round of questions. Another scene that takes on a new meaning under this interpretation is when you go to the lake in Chapter 4, but haven't befriended Onion-san. Susie yells, "Lake, skip!" and throws a rock. The rock immediately sinks, and she follows up with, "Fine, we'll see how far you get at the lake next time." I'm sure you're smart enough to see why I think this implies something more than just skipping rocks. One last interesting thing I want to bring up before talking about why I think there's a fountain down there is Mother 1's breadcrumb glitch. For the few who don't know, one of Toby Fox's biggest inspirations is the Mother series of RPGs, the most notable of which being Earthbound. In the series, there is a game called Mother 1, and in that game is the breadcrumb glitch.
We go back to Pippi, and she still had those breadcrumbs that we gave her earlier. And the problem is that those breadcrumbs' location for the start of the trail doesn't exist. And so when we try to use the breadcrumbs to go back, we are now in what we call a wild purgatory that shouldn't exist. So this is the fundamental of what breadcrumb glitch can do for us. We are able to just completely get out of bounds and run all over. So we are just gonna walk straight to the end of the game.
A loaf of bread tends to leave crumbs wherever it goes. That is the description of the bread that you are required to take from Sans. Grabbing that bread, that is the one thing that you need to do before starting the lake walk. I really do see the argument for this not being an intentional reference, and I don't necessarily see it as critical evidence for what I'm saying. But doesn't it seem like it lines up a little bit too well? In my eyes, a work that inspired Toby Fox having a notable glitch where bread is required to skip directly to the end of the game is pretty damn hard to write off. Now that you know why I think they skipped ahead, let's move on to why I think there's a fountain at the bottom of the lake. When you remove the blur as the two are sinking, it gets much easier to notice that something is seriously off with this scene. This is what Noelle looks like after being fully submersed. Notice how her hair is flowing outwards, her eyes are shut tight, and her appearance is dimmed. She's very clearly underwater, probably pretty deep, which makes these next sprites extremely interesting. After clearly being immersed in the darkness, Noelle's hair suddenly goes back to normal. Her eyes open wide, and the bottom of her face illuminates as if the soul's light is shining on her. How is that possible? I don't think she's still underwater. At least not in the way she was before. Noelle and Chris, with the soul shining through the waves, have found themselves somewhere else. I think that using the power of the soul, the children were able to find their way into a dark world at the bottom of the lake. Where else could they have ended up that immediately makes them look like they're not underwater when we saw them go down but never come back up? It's Occam's razor. And it's not like this detail is impossible to notice without removing the blur. Here are what those same sprites look like with the blur. You can still pretty clearly see the difference in Noelle's appearance with or without. I don't think this is a case where a psychotic Deltarune fan is reading too far into things. This feels so intentional. They could have just kept using the same underwater sprites as before. Nobody made them make new sprites for this part, with light coming from where the soul would be. The more I think about it, the more convincing it is. The soul is shining the way to the fountain. Here's another thing. What if a dark fountain, opened underwater, works like a deep-sea geyser? In the ocean, these geysers are a product of a reaction between spreading tectonic plates and freezing cold seawater. When the fluid from under the Earth's crust and seawater react, the chemicals and minerals all instantly solidify and often produce a thick black smoke. This chemical mixture allows bacteria to subsist and feed off of chemosynthesis from the chemicals gushing from the Earth. In other words, geysers under the waves that produce black smoke allow life to persist in some of the harshest conditions known to man. Where have we heard this before? Dark fountains are explicitly said to produce a thick black smoke when opened, and in this context, they also play a key role in allowing Chris and Noelle to survive beneath the lake. Deltarune seems very interested in exploring how the fountains work with unique questions and edge cases in each chapter, so I can totally see what happens when a fountain is opened underwater being a question that's explored. One last thing I need to address before moving on to what I think this all means for the story is the song from the sea. In Chapter 2, when talking to Onion-san, he says this.
Sometimes I hear a song at night. Just a little piece of a song, you hear? It sounds like it's coming from under the water, deep. Oh, I'm about to make another friend. I can feel it, you hear? Do you want to hear another secret? I think, maybe, I've heard that song before, coming from the sea. The whole thing. It's not a new song. But I can't remember. I can't remember, you hear? I'm going to investigate, you hear?
He has not been seen since. There's a theory going around that this guy, normal NPC, killed him and is now selling his body as a fun festival snack. But I think that he very well could have found and gotten lost in the dark world down there, seeking out the song from the sea. Or maybe normal NPC found him in the dark world and took care of business. Either one could be true, they are not mutually exclusive. Perhaps the Song of the Sea is something coming from within the dark world. I don't think it's unreasonable to think that a sound can escape the dark world into the light world, especially considering the scene where Asgore kicks Chris and Susie out of the Flower Castle. If Asgore is able to stand there and lock the door despite that door being fully in the dark world, it's not a stretch to say that if he were to yell, the sound would escape. Granted, it would take something much, much, much louder for Onion-san and Susie to hear it, even though it's coming from deep underwater, but the point still stands. The only other things that we know about the Song from the Sea come from Gerson's monologue before his fight. Can you hear its song, singing from the deep? That is the ringing of the hammer of justice. I'm not the only one who finds this conclusion a little bit weird. It really does just raise more questions than answers. How would Onion-san know the sound of the hammer of justice before the church dark world was created? How would he know that sound at all? I'd need more time to collect my thoughts on what exactly it means, but I don't think the contents of the song matter as much as the fact that there is a song at all. So, if everything is how I say it is, what does that mean for the story going forward? To start, if we assume that there really is only one ending, that means the main route will come here too, presumably in Chapter 7, because that's what we need to insert to continue. If the main route comes here too, then this will presumably be the last Dark World of the game. What strikes me most about this is that if the precedent of one major Dark World location per chapter is upheld, then we have a very good idea of where the rest of the game will take place. It would almost certainly have to be the shelter in Chapter 6 and the lake in Chapter 7, assuming that the shelter and lake aren't somehow connected. I don't know how they would be connected, but it is something to consider. Flowery says this after losing to the knight.
Something horrible is stirring beneath the town, a darkness beyond your imagination.
I think this could very well be referring to the shelter. We know very little about what's on the inside, but structures like these generally go deep underground and have tunnels to protect whoever goes in. Or less optimistically, keep the outside world safe from whatever's inside. Either way, I still think it fits. This interpretation also fits with Chapter 5 being the last fun chapter. There isn't any more time for Dark Worlds in fun areas like the Holiday Mansion or the hospital. The remaining Dark Worlds are going to be in areas that are more important to the main plot than some of the other chapters, making the bunker and lake incredibly likely. Another important detail of these two locations is that the fountains are already made and may not have to be sealed. If Chris disappears without a trace, we know that they won't have a hand in creating either of the next two Dark Worlds, because in the weird route they won't be there to make them. More interestingly, the same would go for Noelle. I think this functionally rules out the hospital for a future Dark World. Additionally, and you can take or leave this part, but since Chris is the only person we know for a fact can seal fountains, some interesting questions are raised on how the next fountains will be sealed in the weird route since Chris won't be there to do anything about them. I think that maybe Susie, or any Lightner, could be able to seal a fountain if they have determination. Since fountains can be opened by anybody with determination, maybe they can also be sealed by anyone with determination. I don't have any hard proof for this, but I also don't think it's that illogical. Maybe Rousey would teach Susie how, maybe she figures out herself after seeing Chris do it, but the outcome would be the same. The biggest issue I'd have would be that monster souls are well known to be weaker than human souls, and if monsters can seal fountains, why would the Roaring group chat need Chris and the soul? To that, I would ask, how did the first fountain that Asgore found even get sealed if Chris didn't have the soul yet? We don't have any hints aside from maybe the vessel, but there are other humans that would have been around to seal the fountains. So I feel like monsters would have to be able to seal Dark Worlds, since the one that Asgore Vague posted about had to have gotten sealed somehow. This is probably a video in and of itself. So final thoughts before wrapping up. I really love this interpretation because of how it highlights and would recontextualize the tragedy Noelle was going through. The entire point of her going to the lake was to stop being a Noelle and break free from the path that she thinks is set before her. If they do end up skipping ahead to a later part of the game, even if she doesn't realize it, she was always doomed to end up in the same place beneath the lake, weird route or no. I think Noelle's theme of doing something crazy would also mirror Rousey. Throughout the story, Rousey is trying to follow the rules of the world to try and change fate. We mainly see this in Chapter 5 with Flowery, but also in Chapter 4 when he says Susie is supposed to wear ribbons, or his insistence that Darkeners are supposed to serve Lighteners. But what would happen if he let himself go? He'd burn the narrative down in an instant. He possesses knowledge that would destroy the story, but he does whatever he can to keep that knowledge hidden until the right time. But if he were to do something crazy, he may actually be able to do something about his situation and make a real change. Or not, depending on the type of story Deltarune wants to be. So, do I think all of this is true? The biggest issue I have with this interpretation is the question of who made the fountain to begin with. I had this whole segment prepared where I wrote from Dessa's perspective the events leading up to her creating the fountain, and why that would explain the voice in the code. But after reading some more, I realized it didn't make as much sense to me as I would have hoped. I really do like everything I've come up with, and I think there's a lot here that fits surprisingly well and would serve as a great explanation to some of the biggest questions I had after playing. Especially why there's light coming from under Noelle. That being said, I would need to flesh out how the fountain got there before I believed it 100%. I still think that this makes more sense than the idea that they no-clipped out of Hometown into the Gaster dimension. Making this video was definitely an interesting experience for me. I don't remember the last time that I reacted to anything quite like I reacted to this scene. It is a very rare thing that makes me sit down, open a notebook, and stay up late scribbling notes, let alone put a lot of time into writing and editing a video about it. And I think that even if it's not the correct or intended takeaway, I find some hope in the weird route. The hope that anyone who cares to think about and hates the path they're going down can say fuck that and do something about it. I think that agency is what gives us hope, and that the ability to act is freedom. You don't need to kill your classmate and drown yourself to see that. And maybe it was these specific themes being thrown in my face that was the push that I needed to make something that I can be proud that I did. Because what is art for if not eliciting this kind of response? In this scene, Deltarune is doing its job as an inspirational work by giving me the right push to create. Maybe I'll look back on this video as subpar or cringy, but at least I will have done something worth looking back on. I hope that even if you disagree with my thoughts on Deltarune, that can be your takeaway. So, will I ever make another video? I do not know. There are a lot of things I'd love to do that aren't YouTube. If it wasn't clear, this whole project was more to see if I was capable of putting something like this together, rather than launching a successful YouTube career. If it did somehow blow up, I don't even know what I would do with it. I have some other ideas about what another video would look like, but who knows if they'll ever get turned into a script. It could literally be anything from mapping out the parallels between Noelle and Rousey, to why Sandstorm Chip in ADVOU is an allegory for corporate taxes. I truly do not know. So one last piece of advice before I end the video. The creative process is difficult, but is so much more worthwhile than wasting your days scrolling on your phone. It may sound cliche at this point, but when I look back on my life, I'd like to say that I built something interesting and worthwhile and didn't spend my finite time watching slop. So go out and make something. Even if the end product isn't everything you hoped it would be, going through that process is worthwhile in and of itself. I feel like there's so much more I could say or go back and add to the script, but if I don't stop now, this video will never get done. Goodbye.